Hi, I'm Mark Regev, and we're here today for another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. And I'm here in the studios of JNS in Jerusalem, and next to me is my co-host, Ruthie Blum. How are you today, Ruthie?
I'm good, Mark. Thank you. I just want to tell viewers and listeners that we are taping this on Wednesday, February 19th. And the reason it's important to state that is that before our next podcast, two very important events are happening in Israel. And one is happening tomorrow. That's on Thursday, when 4 dead bodies are being returned to Israel from Gaza by Hamas. And on Saturday, 6 live hostages, we don't know in what shape, but live hostages, will be released on Saturday. So a lot is happening. The country is very tense. And unfortunately, 3 of those bodies we know or are told are the Bibas family, Shiri, the mother, and her toddler and her baby, who were the 3 of them kidnapped on October 7th very violently. And her husband was just returned from Gaza last week or the week before, and he now has received the horrible news that his wife and babies are dead.
Israel, of course, at this stage, is still not officially saying that. Hamas has said that they're dead and they're coming back as bodies. But Israel's not denying that. But until we see the bodies, and they're going to go for examinations and so forth to make sure that they are, in fact, the people that Hamas says they are. And who knows what situation, what state the bodies are in, yes? But it's a difficult time. She became, the Bibas family, she and her 2 children, became in many ways a symbol of Hamas's atrocities on October 7th. And we've all seen the videos, and I'm sure they'll be played tomorrow and in the coming days, especially if there's going to be funerals. We'll all watch the old videos of them being kidnapped, and they really are traumatic. And you have to ask the following question. I think people abroad need to understand. Who are these terrorists in Gaza that we're fighting? And to kidnap a young mother with, as you said, with an infant and a baby, and take them hostage at gunpoint, and the end, murdering them. Who are these people that we are being forced to deal with? Who are these people that have been our neighbors in Gaza for the last how many years? Who are these people who we are forced to negotiate with to try to get people out? And I think a lot of people, sometimes, especially in the media, they say, well, Israel says this and Hamas says this. It's like 2 even players. Yeah? No. The Bibas family and what happened to them should remind us of exactly who we're dealing with and understand, yes, that when Israel is today fighting these terrorists, we're not just fighting to protect ourselves, but I really believe we're fighting terrorism that really is a scourge, which is evil, for want of a better word, and that has to be defeated.
Well, there's no question about it. But you see, we're in this dreadful situation because the Israeli public wants all of the hostages, all Israelis, the public, the government, every Knesset member, every member of the public wants every hostage back. Make no mistake, and that's despite contrary to the accusations of the left that Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, doesn't care about the hostages and wants to prolong the war. That is a lie. But the question is how we do it. It's forced us because Hamas understands who we are, that we're people who care about every individual person. They use their people as human shields. They don't care about children and babies and women. In fact, they train their children to become jihadists. But so we're in this awful dilemma because on the one hand, we shouldn't be negotiating with them. We should be dictating to them. But unfortunately, because the war, though we had many achievements in this war against Hamas, we had our hands tied behind our backs by the Biden administration and by the fact that we were trying to be careful not to kill any hostages inadvertently while bombing or shooting terrorists. So now my question is this. There are these surveys that are done all the time that most of the Israeli public would prefer to see the hostages home, even if that means losing the war, not defeating Hamas. And I want to discuss with you whether that's really a binary choice that we've now seen. Is it a binary choice? We have to choose between hostages and defeating this vile enemy, or is there a way to do both?
And this is not just a theoretical question, because we are approaching now the end of phase one of the deal that was negotiated, and we're entering phase two. And the real big questions to get the remainder of the hostages out is what is going to happen in phase two. Now, it's clear what Hamas would like to happen. Hamas would like to dictate to Israel that if you want all the hostages out, you have to basically give up all your war goals. You have to pull out of Gaza, and you have to recognize that Hamas will stay in power in Gaza. And that's back to square one, having Hamas as a neighbor. Now, it's true we might be able to save a lot of the people who are still left in Gaza and bring live people home, and I hope it's possible to do that. But the questions ahead of us are strategic. They deal with what Gaza will look like in the coming years, and you can't run away from them. Is it a binary choice? You asked a good question, between getting hostages out and getting and destroying Hamas's rule over Gaza and dismantling its military machine. I'm not sure. I mean, if it's really a binary choice, because I don't think Hamas in any case would release all the hostages, because the hostages are for them their ultimate insurance policy from their perspective. And so would they really have released them all? I have a question mark about that. And the other thing is these negotiations, and it's interesting, the Prime Minister has appointed Minister Dermer, who's maybe the closest minister in the cabinet to him, to head the negotiations on the second stage of the deal, which shows how seriously he's taking this. Now, if Hamas agrees to leave power, long shot, if they agree that they'll be no longer have the guns in Gaza, it's possible to get a deal and achieve the war aims. But I said, and I've said in the past, yes, there were three war aims that have been articulated by the government on Gaza. One, bring the hostages home. Two, destroy Hamas's military machine. And three, end their rule of Gaza. And obviously sometime you put preference. At the moment we're putting preference on getting the hostages out. But I don't think this can end. And you talked about a poll. I saw a poll a few weeks ago. You're correct with what you say. Most of the Israelis will say, of course, we've got to prioritize getting the hostages out, get all the hostages out. But I also saw another poll that said if Hamas stays in power in Gaza, 70% of Israelis will see that as a failure.
Well, of course. First of all, Israelis will see anything as a failure if the hostages aren't freed and if we lose the war. It all depends how these poll questions are asked, by the way, because if you ask a sane Israeli, okay, let's say we get all the hostages out. I know in the beginning of the war what the idea was. Well, why don't we just get all the hostages out, and in exchange we'll release all the Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails, all for all, so to speak, and then later we'll go in and defeat Hamas. Let's first get our people out of there. But the thing was, Hamas never agreed to that. They never said, we're going to give you all the hostages. It's possible, had that been, the ransom, which is to say, you want your people back, release all the prisoners, and we'll call it even. That was never on the table. So because it was never on the table, there was an illusion in the public that somehow the government wasn't doing its job to get the hostages home. It was a lie. And I have to say, even the Biden administration, even now, former members of the Biden administration are saying that Netanyahu was never an obstacle to a deal with Hamas. Never. Okay, and we know that. Now, there are many on the right in Israel who are not happy that Netanyahu supposedly capitulated to these demands of Hamas. So, he's doing a balancing act between satisfying. I mean, he's the prime minister of all of Israel, so of course he's supposed to satisfy the country. And he's caught between a rock and a hard place because he knows that we need to get the hostages out. He also knows we can't have had all those soldiers who died not only in this war since October 7th, but in previous operations in Gaza. I can tell you, my own son, he was in Gaza more than once over the last decade. And, you know, the question is, okay, so either we're finishing the job. I have to say, all the residents of the South used to say, just finish the job already, because we keep leaving the tunnels there, leaving the terrorists there. Finish the job. But here we just, Hamas was very clever. It said, okay, there's one thing that always works with Israelis. You kidnap. We had Gilad Shalit, one soldier kidnapped. He was held for 5 years, and the country was in turmoil over that one soldier. And we all were, because we said, what if it's my son? What if it were your son? But it was a huge mistake. To what we did in exchange for that has endangered us so badly. And now look what we're doing. The question is, can we get past this without the country falling apart internally, just emotionally?
And a lot of the rhetoric in the debate over what price Israel should pay to get the hostages, it's clear we're prepared to pay a price, but what price should we be willing to pay to get the hostages out? And are we willing to leave Hamas in power in Gaza when this is over? I think not. As much as I want every single hostage out, and we'll do everything we can. We had a debate last week. I was more flexible than you on these issues. But there is part of the narrative is that, of course, this deal was on the table May 24, right? And that the Israeli government didn't agree, and because Netanyahu had ulterior motives, right? And what you said is very important, because let's be frank.
Wait, make it clear. It's not that he didn't agree. It's that he's being accused.
Yes, I said that 100%, he's been accused of not agreeing. That's the narrative, right? And you said quite correctly that the people from the Biden administration who have no love for Israel's current prime minister, they would have much preferred, I think, Yair Lapid to stay in power. From their point of view, he's a much more congenial person to work with for all sorts of reasons which are not relevant for this current discussion. But when you heard both Blinken, the former Secretary of State, but then now Secretary, like days before the inauguration, and I think it was 2 or 3 days before the inauguration, I heard their Middle East envoy, McGurk, and both of them said, it's not true that there was a deal there was a deal on the table, but Hamas rejected it, And McGurk, the Middle East envoy of the Biden administration, actually said there was a change in the end of December. I heard the interview. There was a change in the end of December that Hamas finally came around to accepting the deal that had been on the table since May. And I think there's this narrative out there that the Israeli government was somehow playing games. Now, of course we should negotiate tough. Of course we've got to demand our positions. As I said at the beginning of this conversation today, we have to remember who we're negotiating with. If you don't negotiate tough, you're not going to get anything. But to say, yes, that there was a deal on the table a year ago and that Israel said no and closed the door, it's not true. Unfortunately, it is repeated, and many people believe it.
Well, sadly, the fact that it's repeated internationally is one thing. The tragedy is that it's repeated by members of the Israeli opposition in the parliament, okay? We have the leader of our opposition, Yair Lapid, who said he's going to Washington to present his own plan for Gaza, and that it's because Netanyahu doesn't want the hostages back. He doesn't care if they're dead. He wants to stay in power at all costs. This is the most disloyal opposition I've ever seen. Then we have the head of the joint Labor Meretz Party, the far-left Meretz Party, joined with Labor to form a party called the Democrats, ironically. And his name is Yair Golan. The two Yairs, by the way. Yair Golan he actually says that what we're doing in Gaza, he said that is reminiscent of the Holocaust, that Trump's plan for relocating Gazans to help them and all that is like the Holocaust. And he has accused Netanyahu of having blood on his hands. So when you have Israelis traipsing around and saying these things, first of all, Al Jazeera and all the other Arab outlets, they're constantly quoting them. They're so happy when you have Israelis saying doing their job for them. So that's really awful. And that's true, sadly, of some of the hostage families as well, who are just feeding right into Hamas's hands. But setting that aside.
And if I can say, that's also exactly the narrative that the hostages who are forced to do those videos, yes, that's exactly what they say. They say Netanyahu is not,
exactly.
And it's part of Hamas's psychological warfare.
Of course. So that is true. But then, the question is, okay, so are we showing strength or weakness? Because yesterday we withdrew most of our forces from Lebanon. We had extended the ceasefire agreement to keep troops there because Hezbollah was still amassing weapons and was not abiding by the agreement. And by the way, it's still not. We now have left in 5 places in Lebanon an IDF outpost or something to guard to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't take over again and doesn't pose a threat. But all the communities in the north are now afraid because actually Hezbollah was supposed to go beyond the Litani River. We had a whole deal there, and that's not exactly what's happening right now. So Hamas also sees that we withdrew from Lebanon. So in the meantime, Hamas sees what President Trump is doing. There's all these moving parts. And I alternate between being optimistic about our move towards victory and towards a peace deal with Saudi Arabia and the absolute opposite. And where do you stand on this?
We'll get in a second to all these. But I want to refer to one thing you said a few minutes ago. And that was, you criticized the opposition for some of the things they're saying. Let's be clear. Israel's a parliamentary democracy like Britain, like Germany, and it's the job of the opposition to criticize the government. But I think what I believe is to say things that are just, I think, very problematic. Like to say that the prisoners could have been released long ago and Netanyahu had an interesting, I think that's over the top, right? It's their job to criticize, I understand that. But I think, and when hostage families say it, and not all of them do, but some of them do. And the people, they're often in the media, the ones who say it. Bibi has blood on his hands and all this sort of stuff. So they get Israeli society gives certain groups of people, you can't, and rightly maybe, you can't criticize them. The bereaved families can say what they want. Hostage families can say what they want. And maybe that's right. I don't know how I'd behave if I had a daughter or a son being held hostage in Gaza. And so maybe it's right that we give them the benefit of, they can say what they want and just let it's part of their pain. It's part of the process that they're going through. You moved us to another issue, which is Lebanon. And it's correct. Yesterday, the IDF pulled back from most of its positions in southern Lebanon, where we had been, to a few positions which are directly opposite Jewish communities in northern Israel to protect those specific communities. I remain optimistic about Lebanon. I'll tell you why. Because Israel has shown, and in accordance with the agreement and with the backing of the United States of America, that when we see Hezbollah do something that's an infringement, we immediately act. The Air Force acts. We take out that target, whether it's smuggling weapons from Syria into Lebanon, whether it's moving forces back to the south, which they're forbidden to do under the agreement, doing all sorts of things. We continue to be active. And that's an accepted now part. We've changed the narrative. When, in the past, if Israel saw something, we could say, we'll tell the United Nations, what could we do? Now we act militarily against the infringement. And I think that's why, even though we pulled back in accordance with the agreement, in coordination with the Americans, in coordination with the Lebanese army, if we see Hezbollah starting to raise its ugly head, yes, we can take it out. And I think that's the new reality in Lebanon, which gives us the ability to succeed there. And when Israel succeeds, let's be frank, Lebanon also succeeds. Because Lebanon has become a failed state. What used to be the Switzerland of the Middle East, yes? We're both old enough, at least I'm old enough, Ruthie, to remember when Lebanon, everyone wanted to go on holidays, all the diplomats went there for, and Beirut was this swinging city, yes? Lebanon's become a failed state. It's broke, its political structures. And it was all because Hezbollah was like this cancer that had grown so large it dominated the whole country. And now, because of steps that we took in Israel for our own good, we didn't do it, we weren't altruistic. We did it for our own, to protect our people and to destroy a very vicious enemy, brutal, horrific enemy. But in so doing, inadvertently, Israel helped cut Hezbollah down to size, which means the other groups in Lebanon are relatively more powerful. And Lebanon today has a chance of pulling itself out of the mud and becoming not a failed state. It might not be perfect, but it has the chance to have a positive momentum there now. And from Israel's perspective, and of course that's my first and main interest, what's good for Israel, but not living next to a failed state, living next to a successful state, a state that is not an economic basket case, a case where there's a government that actually can rule, yes, that's surely in Israel's interest as well.
Well, of course it is, but I just say that we're seeing some disturbing pictures coming out of southern Lebanon. Hezbollah flags flying all around next to Lebanese army soldiers. The Lebanese army was supposed to take over that whole area in the south and basically police it instead of us, right? Well, I don't know. I don't know how much of that Lebanese army is pro-Hezbollah or not pro-Hezbollah. We don't know. And I read an article this morning about Lebanese residents of southern Lebanon whose houses have been pretty much destroyed or at least damaged severely, as the houses in Israel's north. And they're saying we're waiting for Hezbollah to renovate, to give us the money to renovate and to come in and fix it up. So it is true. We really decimated Hezbollah. We killed the leadership. It's great. I mean, we killed Nasrallah. But the question is it rebuilding? And do the Lebanese people really want it out of the way? And we don't know that because, for one thing, we're seeing weapons being smuggled in again from Iran. And, there's so much destabilization also in Syria. It's great that the Assad regime fell. But Syria is also prone to becoming a different jihadist state. So all of these things are happening.
So we have to keep our eye on the ball, that's clear. But there was an incident, I think it was Friday, where UN peacekeepers, who in Israel don't have a very high reputation, yes? I mean, from Israel's perspective, the UN peacekeepers were all across South Lebanon, and under their noses, Hezbollah built its very strong infrastructure, and under their noses, Hezbollah would attack us, yes? And what would they do? At best, they'd write a report, and often the criticism in Israel was that they were, complicit. You have stronger language than me on this issue, but there was an incident last Friday where a senior officer from the UN UNIFIL in Lebanon was attacked outside in the vicinity of Beirut airport. And there was violence. And we haven't seen that sort of violence in the Beirut area. And according to the press reports that I read, it's because they are preventing now, the Lebanese government, together with others, is preventing Hezbollah from receiving rearm through the airport. And it's clear that Hezbollah is having trouble reestablishing itself because its main reasons, the main arteries for which it, got its ammunition and its munitions and its money were, first of all, through Assad's controlled Syria, which is now a problem for it because Iran has been pushed out of Syria. And secondly, through the airport, where you'd have direct flights from Tehran to Beirut. And if those are not happening anymore, now there are other ways, and we can discuss that other ways in a second. I know you want to raise this issue. But it's clear that Hezbollah's ability to rearm and rebuild itself, as it did after all the previous rounds of fighting, has been much limited by the new reality that has been created by Israel's counterattack.
Okay, that is true. But I'm still hesitant to be optimistic because with the left-wing Israeli media and the problematic heads of our general staff and security services who were not fired after October 7th, even despite the fact that they were asleep on the job or they had their idea about Hamas being deterred and Hezbollah being deterred, etc., was completely false, and other reasons, and we won't go into those right now. I'm wondering whether we can trust that. Let me ask you something. Would you now buy a house and near the northern border of Israel, near Lebanon? I certainly would not. And by the way, it would be a good real estate deal right now to do it because There are a lot of people who would probably be happy to sell their homes at a really good price. Would you want to? I wouldn't. Would you want to trust living in the Gaza envelope? I'm talking about now. I realize we've done a lot, but the question is, are we really going to stay on the ball? Are we really going to kill who it's necessary to kill? Because we have all of these forces, and we have the academics in Israel, the media, the opposition in the Knesset. We have these forces pushing against victory, against Netanyahu, and so it concerns me because those are extremely convincing, especially with all the so many hostages left there. And so will we be able to do some kind of phase 2, which is, again, phony because you can't negotiate with Hamas. But
so I want to give you something that gives me confidence, is that the incoming commander of the Israeli military, General Eyal Zamir, I know him personally. We worked together when we were both on the Prime Minister's staff. He was the military attaché, not the military attaché, military secretary, it's called, to the Prime Minister. And I always thought he was the consummate professional, but also very much a soldier, someone who's very military, and defending the country is in his blood. And I think he's a good appointment, and I think the country as a whole saw his appointment as something good. He lost in the previous, he wanted to be chief of staff before, but now he's got the job. He wasn't in the leadership that is responsible for October 7th, the military leadership, so he's not tainted by that. And I think if anyone can bring the military up to meet the challenges of the coming years, he'll do a good job. I can also tell you personally, he's a very honorable man. I had an issue with one of my children once in the army, and I said, you got a moment to speak to me about something personal? He said, personal, come in straight away. He's in Israel, in Hebrew you say he's a ben adam. He's a good man.
A mensch. He's a mensch.
Yeah, I think he's the right man in the right place. And I saw also the way Israeli society received him as the new chief of staff. I think he comes in with a lot of credit, and his success, as they say in all these ceremonies, is our success.
Well, Netanyahu did say about him, and this was really important because I focused on that. Netanyahu said Zamir, he didn't use this word, but he said an attack dog. In other words, he is someone who believes in an army that's ready for attack. And this has been a problem with our army. It was so ironic that we have this army that rather than saying we need to attack, and the government saying, hold on, we have to make decisions, and you have to, we have it the other way around. We have a government that says, okay, you need to do this, and the army says, no, don't do that. So Zamir, apparently, according to Netanyahu, is someone who definitely will be on with the mentality that we attack the enemy, and he will have to be restrained by the government, not the other way around, which is very important. But then we will see if that is true. We will watch all our left-wing flanks start to attack him and look to assassinate his character and possibly find things he did wrong in the past. You'll see. You just watch that. If he really is what Netanyahu says, you watch. It won't be long before all our friends on channel 11, 12, 13 are going to all be going after him.
So I want to tell you what you've said, the first part of what you said, that you want generals who want to fight and want to win. It's not just Ruthie Blum who says that. There's a very famous Israeli story about Moshe Dayan when he was chief of staff in the early 50s. And at the time, Ariel Sharon was in charge of the commandos and then the paratroopers. But Sharon was always a bit, some people found him difficult to work with, and some people thought that he was overly aggressive. And these people came to Dayan and said, this guy's, he's not a team player, they would say, or he's overly aggressive. And Moshe Dayan, famously said, I prefer a horse that I have to rein in than one that I have to hit to gallop. And I think that's true about the military. We want a military that wants victory, wants to fight to protect this country, and it's the job of the political leadership to say, well, no, let's be careful, let's there are other considerations, right? But the military should be gung ho about winning, and I think Zamir will bring that to the position.
Well, I certainly hope so, and I'm looking forward to that, because we have several other heads of security who are not with that mentality. Anyway, this has been a big problem. I think that Israel's internal struggles now, they're not as great as one would think, because after all, there was massive support for this government, but the loud voices from the left make you think that the country is actually not united. Okay, I think more of the country is united than is reported. We know that our soldiers in the field feel great unity and love for the country, and we know that the trouble is that's not what's being portrayed, and it makes for a low morale. Again, it all depends like which media outlets you read and watch. That's a big problem because they have a massive effect on general mood.
So my feeling is the mood in the country is good. I think there's support for the current deal to get hostages out. I think there is also, as I talked about in that poll before, there is an understanding that we can't allow Hamas to stay in power in Gaza. There can be an honest debate about the tactics of doing that. Should we be prioritizing? To what extent should we prioritize? Everyone believes, the government believes in prioritizing the hostages out, but to what extent? It's obviously not limitless. I mean, if someone said, if Hamas were to say, they won't say, you have to give up Jerusalem and we'll get the hostages out. I mean, no, that's not going to happen, right? But you have to be able to balance these things. And as we spoke about before, we have 3 war aims, and the Prime Minister says the whole time we will implement all 3. We'll get the hostages out, we will destroy Hamas's military machine, and they will no longer run Gaza. And I would say to the international community, right, anything short of that is just a recipe for more problem down the line. If Hamas, heaven forbid, it's not going to happen, but if Hamas was to stay in power in Gaza, you're just going to have more and more war, more bloodshed. It's not good for Israel. It's not good for the Gazans. It's not good for anyone. I don't think even in the Arab world, except for maybe Qatar, no one's interested in seeing Hamas remain in power in Gaza. Definitely not the Egyptians. In India, Gaza's other neighbor, because when President Sisi, right, he's got enough problem with his own Muslim Brotherhood back at home, right? And he looks at Hamas and he sees, these same Islamist terrorists who have in the past caused so much problem in Egypt.
Right, except, of course, his government enabled all kinds of materials to go into Gaza just to keep them happy and keep them out of Egypt.
Was that a policy, or was that just they didn't have their eye on the ball?
It was a mixture, okay? I don't believe that in a government like the Egyptian government that they're just not having their eye on the ball. It's a mixture of also, there was a lot of bribery around on the border we know that. But it was also, it's his way of keeping them from bothering him in his government, and he didn't want to be toppled by Muslim Brotherhood. But here's the thing. The thing is that it was, thank God that President Trump came along and said, okay, what we really need to do is empty out Gaza and rebuild it as something completely different, an international hub. Now, you said you would be telling the international community, but you realize that the international community, along with the Israeli left, far left, still talks about a 2-state solution. Now, thank God, because when you say Hamas can't be in power, neither can the Palestinian Authority be in power. We cannot
Can I correct you?
Palestinians running Gaza.
So first of all, I disagree with that second part, but I want to tell you something, yeah? You said the left wants a Palestinian state. I think it was 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, the leader of the left, this Yair Golan fellow, former general, who's the leader of the left, he did a 1-hour interview on Israel's public television, Channel 11, and he was interviewed by a journalist who I think is very sympathetic. How's that? I'm being very polite, to Golan's sort of world outlook, yeah? And in a whole hour interview, neither the interviewer or the interviewee talked about a 2-state solution. The most moderate thing that they can say, right, is that the Fatah should be allowed to come back to Gaza, but no one talks about a 2-state solution. Yair Lapid, who famously at the UN, when he was prime minister, said he believed in a two-state solution. He doesn't. He says when he's asked about it, he says we're not talking about it. It's not on the table. And I would say to all these people in the international community, you have to ask the following question: what have the Palestinians done? What is there about Palestinian behavior that means forget Netanyahu, forget Smotrich, forget the Israeli right? Yes. Why has the Israeli left moved away, at least publicly? Why do they not want to talk about a two-state solution? And all those people I don't know whether it's in Stockholm or in Dublin or in London who say two-state solution, I'd ask them, how realistic, if the people who are the natural supporters in Israel for a two-state solution, when they don't want to talk about it, maybe you should pay attention.
Right, but you see, they don't really care. You know what they really mean? If you're talking about Ireland, for example, I think when they say two-state solution, they really mean get rid of Israel, which, by the way, is what would happen if there were such a thing. There is no two-state solution, not with Palestinians, maybe with Canada,
Canada and the United States have had their own issues, and they speak the same language, right? Us and the Palestinians. But maybe we should try to finish on a note. And you wanted to say a few words about Turkey doing something not so good in Lebanon?
Yes, well, we're seeing reports now that this is very counterintuitive, but you see what happens when jihadists want to be on the same side against the West and against Israel. Turkey wants to play a huge role in Syria. Turkey is President Erdogan wants to be the leader of the Sunnis. Now, that's not Iran. Iran is Shiite, and Iran was supporting Hezbollah and Assad. So one would think that Turkey is against Hezbollah and against helping Iran. But instead, Turkey is not only right now cooperating with Iran, Turkey is lending Iran its airspace to fly over to try to resupply Hezbollah, and is enabling through it is facilitating the movement of millions of dollars to Hezbollah from Iran. It's a channel. It's yet a new channel to get Hezbollah rearmed and refinanced by Iran. And Turkey is doing this because at the moment, although Turkey wants to be the hegemon, at the moment, its greater interest is attacking Israel and the West, and later they'll work out their Sunni Shiite differences. And this is a huge danger because Turkey is not only situated in Syria right now and trying to also he's killing off Kurds. It's very complicated in Syria. But what's not complicated is Turkey is a serious enemy of Israel's. That all of these years recently has pretended that we're sort of allies, we're not allies. Now it's an open enemy. And Hezbollah, if Hezbollah is now given tons of funding and weapons, we're in trouble again.
So I'll say the following. First of all, the Turks want to influence in Syria, and they have historic relationships with a new group of people that is running Syria, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And that if Turkey is a conduit for Iranian supplies for Hezbollah, that's a problem with a capital P. And I'll finish with this because we're running out of time. But if anyone from the Trump White House is listening to our podcast this week, President Trump has a relationship with Mr. Erdogan, the president of Turkey. And I would say it's time to put a bit of American pressure on the table. You can't be a member of NATO. You can't say that you're a friend of the West. You can't say you're a friend of the United States if you are a conduit to money and equipment going to Hezbollah. And until next week, Ruthie, I wish you well.
I say the same. So we will see you next week, and by then we will know what has happened to our released hostages.